Death, the secret to real psychological transformation. Let's face it, nobody pulls the death card in a reading and grins. But maybe they should. At first glance, it's all bones and scythes. A skeleton on horseback trampling over what seems like the last remains of dignity. Severed hands, feet, and yes, even a crowned head lie scattered across the scene. But this isn't just macabre flair. Each fragment speaks volumes. That crown, it's not just royalty dethroned, it's the ego humbled. The severed limbs? Old habits, outdated identities, beliefs we once clung to like gospel. What you see is a battlefield between who you were and who you might become. Now, why a skeleton? Because it strips away everything false. No mask, no persona, just the bare-bones truth, pun intended. The scythe that holds doesn't merely cut, it prunes. It's an act of sacred dismemberment. What's no longer serving, you must be cleared away to make space. This isn't about chaos for the sake of drama. It's about spiritual hygiene. The card structure is precise. The fallen figures are past identities, illusions of control, masks society taught us to wear. The death card isn't whispering change, it's yelling, "Wake up!" And what's up with that sunrise in the distance? Most folks don't even notice it. But there it is, quiet, constant, undeniable. It reminds us that death, in this context, is never the end. It's the turning point. Just like in a story where the hero loses everything and, in that emptiness, finds real power. Think of every time life knocked you down hard, job loss, breakup, identity crisis. What came after? If you were brave enough to face the wreckage, something always grew back stronger. Here's a practical way to work with this card's energy. Do a symbolic death ritual. Take a belief or habit that's been limiting you. Write it down, name it aloud, then burn it safely. Watch the smoke rise and remind yourself, you are not your past decisions. You are the one choosing what rises from those ashes. Even something simple like quitting a toxic pattern of self-talk is a sacred scythe moment. The death card doesn't demand grandeur, it demands honesty. But of course, this all raises a deeper question. If we're constantly evolving, dying and being reborn in small ways every day, then what exactly is the real death? And why do we fear it so deeply, even when we crave transformation? Maybe that fear isn't just about endings at all, but about the part of us that knows what we must sacrifice to truly grow. Spiritual and psychological transformation. Death, in its deepest symbolic form, isn't about cemeteries or funerals, it's about radical inner change. This is where the death card leaves the physical behind and steps fully into the psyche. Carl Jung called this process psychic dismemberment, the breaking apart of the old self to integrate unconscious content into consciousness. Think of it as taking apart a machine to understand how it works. Messy, maybe painful, but necessary if you want to rebuild something stronger. This is the core of individuation, a collapse of the false self to birth something more authentic. In spiritual traditions and mythologies, this dismemberment is everywhere. Osiris torn to pieces, Inanna descending into the underworld. Alchemical texts describe mortificatio, the stage where matter is decomposed. It's not punishment, it's preparation. What gets stripped away are illusions, projections, even outdated versions of love or spirituality that no longer serve. You might feel like you're falling apart, but beneath the surface, the unconscious is reshaping the soul. This is sacred work. This is transformation. Jung's idea, reinforced by thinkers like Ettinger, is that transformation doesn't come from bypassing the unconscious. It comes from wrestling with it. You don't become whole by ignoring your shadow, your fear of death, your pain. You become whole by walking through it, eyes open. That's why the death card isn't tragic, it's triumphant. It tells you that what feels like the end is often just the psyche breaking open to let something richer in. Painful? Absolutely. But also profoundly liberating. This isn't just theory, it shows up in real life. Therapy, spiritual retreats, ayahuasca ceremonies, breakups, moments of hitting rock bottom, these are modern initiations. If you're going through a period of loss or confusion, take heart. You're not broken, you're becoming. Try journaling your dreams during these times. They'll often reveal which parts of your unconscious are surfacing, offering clues to your rebirth. Tools like the Red Book by Jung or Ego and Archetype by Ettinger can help frame your chaos as sacred unfolding. But what does it mean then when society avoids this psychic death at all costs? When everything is designed to distract, numb, or preserve the status quo of the ego? Perhaps our resistance to spiritual death is more dangerous than death itself. And perhaps that resistance isn't just cultural, it's ancestral, ritualistic, encoded in how we face mortality across civilizations. Cultural and religious rituals around death. Across time and tradition, humans have never simply let death pass quietly. We ritualize it, dramatize it, even spiritualize it. From ancient burial rites to Christian communion, every culture crafts its own sacred choreography around mortality. Why? Because death in the human psyche demands meaning. When someone dies, or when an old part of us dies symbolically, we need to mark the moment. These rituals aren't just for closure, they're portals. They help us step into the mystery of transformation and rebirth. Take, for example, the practice of sky burial in Tibetan culture. The body is dismembered and offered to vultures, not out of disrespect, but as an act of sacred recycling. Life continues through death. In Christianity, the communion ritual reenacts death and resurrection symbolically every Sunday, eating the body, drinking the blood. Sounds extreme, but it mirrors older rites of spiritual regeneration. These practices echo the core truth the death card whispers. Death isn't the opposite of life, it's a stage within it. Even modern funerals, though often sanitized, are filled with these echoes. The black clothing, the silence, the eulogy, all attempt to give structure to grief, to help us digest the mystery of absence. But these rituals have been fading in emotional depth. We've become awkward with mourning. In some cultures, however, the grief is loud and embodied, keening, dancing, storytelling. These expressions give voice to what the psyche already knows. Transformation needs space, time, and witness. On a personal level, symbolic rituals can be just as powerful. Have you ever written a letter to an old self and buried it? Or created a symbolic altar to honor a past version of you that had to die for who you are now to be born? These acts can be simple, even private, but they invite your unconscious into the conversation. They remind you that change is sacred, not random. They connect you to something bigger than your ego's timeline, something mythic, eternal. But if death is so central to our inner and outer lives, why are we so desperate to control, avoid, or sterilize it today? What happened to the reverence, the rituals, the poetry? Could it be that beneath our obsession with control lies a deeper fear, one not just of death itself, but of what death forces us to leave behind? Human resistance to change and mortality. It's wild how people say they want change, but when it knocks on the door dressed like death, they hide under the bed. That's because real change, the kind that reshapes your identity, always feels like a little death. Even when it's for the better, like leaving a toxic job or ending a relationship that no longer fits, there's grief involved. We don't just resist death because of fear. We resist because we're attached to who we think we are, even when that version of us is outdated, cramped, or in pain. Carl Jung understood that the psyche clings to the familiar because it feels like safety. The ego, Our everyday sense of self wants continuity, not chaos. So when the unconscious sends signs that it's time to evolve, we often rationalize, avoid, or self-sabotage. That's the inner conflict. Think of the person who keeps saying, "I want to be free," but never quits the soul-crushing job. Or the one who says they crave intimacy, but runs from vulnerability. It's not hypocrisy, it's unconscious resistance. This is where the death card steps in like a divine interrupter. It says, stop pretending. It shows you the cost of clinging. Every habit, every belief, every identity you refuse to release becomes a weight. And over time, the pressure builds until the psyche can no longer hold it. That's when crisis hits. A health scare, a betrayal, a breakdown. But instead of asking, why is this happening to me? What if we asked, what part of me is trying to die so something else can live? Try this. Take stock of your life and ask, where am I pretending something still fits when it really doesn't? Write down the roles you've outgrown, the personas you wear out of fear. Burn that list or bury it. Then do one thing that aligns with the new self emerging. Maybe it's setting a boundary, signing up for a class you feared, or simply telling someone the truth. Small acts can become sacred deaths that move the wheel of transformation. But there's a catch. The more we resist, the louder death knocks. And when avoidance becomes cultural, when an entire society clings to the illusion of permanence, what happens to the collective soul? Maybe that's why the skeleton keeps showing up, not as a threat, but as a reminder. There is structure beneath the decay. There is clarity in the bones. And what we fear most may be the very key to our renewal. The skeleton as dual symbol. The skeleton is one of the most misunderstood symbols in all of tarot. People see bones and think end, but the truth is far more layered. Strip away the drama, and you'll see the skeleton isn't just about death. It's about the framework that remains when everything else falls away. It's what's left when the masks are gone, the ego is silenced, and all your projections have crumbled. It's raw, it's honest, and it's built to last. That's why the death card shows a skeleton. It's not the destroyer, it's the survivor. Bones are paradoxes. They represent both decay and durability. Think about it. Long after the flesh has returned to earth, the skeleton endures. It holds the memory of form, a kind of ghost architecture of who we were. But in tarot, that architecture becomes a launching pad. It reminds us that even after loss, something essential persists. And ironically, it's only by meeting that essence, stripped of all illusions, that we can find true vitality again. Stillness and motion, death and rebirth, all coexist in this symbol. Ever noticed how skeletons move in imagery? They dance. They ride horses. They swing scythes. There's life in the bones. In alchemical texts, bones were believed to carry the spiritual blueprint of the individual. In dreams, they often symbolize the truth beneath the surface, the psyche's deep structure. Carl Jung saw such images not as spooky or grotesque, but as invitations to reframe our relationship with the inevitable. The skeleton isn't coming for you, it's coming with a message. Only what's true will remain. Here's something simple to practice. Observe where your life feels hollow versus where it feels solid. The hollow parts? They might be costumes. But the solid ones, the places where you feel grounded, clear, and honest, those are your bones. Those are the things that will carry you through transformation. Maybe it's your values, your love for something greater than yourself, or your resilience through grief. Whatever it is, that's your inner skeleton. Strengthen it. Trust it. Still, why is it that even when we know there's beauty in the bare bones of existence, we flinch at their appearance? Maybe the skeleton unsettles us because it's a mirror, one that refuses to lie. And maybe, just maybe, That discomfort is pointing us towards something even deeper, something ancient and archetypal, something mythic that's danced alongside death since the beginning of time. Mythic and archetypal death imagery. Throughout mythology and art, death is rarely silent. It dances, it laughs, it transforms. The danse macabre, or dance of death, is a medieval motif that shows skeletons leading kings, peasants, and priests alike in an eerie procession toward the grave. It wasn't just Gothic flair. It was a blunt reminder: death is the great equalizer. Strip away the costumes, and we all wear bones. But hidden in the grotesque is a strange joy, a sacred irreverence. It's not mocking life, it's freeing it from pretense. The death archetype, unlike other tarot figures, often appears androgynous. No clear gender, no clear identity, just essence. That ambiguity is key. It mirrors how transformation doesn't care about your persona, your roles, or your image. It only wants what's real. Aleister Crowley understood this when he portrayed death as a skeletal figure swirling in cosmic ecstasy, surrounded by symbols of disintegration and rebirth. And if you've ever seen Tibetan images of skeletal Buddhas in deep meditation, you know the paradox: stillness inside death, eternity inside the ephemeral. In alchemy, death isn't final, it's fertile. The mortificatio stage is gruesome, but essential. The king is dissolved in acid. The body is dismembered. But what dies is the lie, the illusion, the attachment. The psyche is being restructured. Think about that for a second. What if the worst moments in your life weren't breakdowns but initiations? Archetypal deaths that stripped you of illusions to make room for something deeper? That's not suffering for the sake of pain. That's suffering as spiritual architecture. These images often unsettle modern viewers because they're unfiltered. But their power lies exactly in that rawness. They don't sugarcoat. They ask you to face the mystery directly. Think of the skeletal Artemis, hunter of transitions, liminal spaces, and the wild unknown. Or Saturn, lord of time, who devours to purify. These mythic figures don't destroy randomly. They cut away what's false. And in that cutting, they make space for the sacred to return. They're not villains. They're thresholds. But here's the thing: if these archetypes have echoed through art, religion, and alchemy for millennia, why do we still flinch at their presence today? What's been lost in our symbols, in our collective psyche, that makes the idea of death so sterile now? Could it be that somewhere along the way, we stopped dancing with death and started hiding from it? Avoidance and denial of physical death. For all our technological advances and spiritual philosophies, modern culture still treats death like an awkward relative we hope doesn't show up to dinner. We avoid the word, hide the body, whisper euphemisms like passed away or no longer with us. Even in tarot, some decks omit the word death altogether, replacing it with gentle phrases like transition or transformation, as if the blunt truth might offend. But here's the irony: the more we tiptoe around death, the more power it gains over us. Superstitions thrive in silence. Consider the fear surrounding the number 13, often tied to the death card itself. Hotels skip the 13th floor. People avoid reading on Friday the 13th. But beneath the irrational fear is something deeper, a discomfort with facing impermanence head-on. In myth, stories like the appointment in Samara remind us, death doesn't stalk, it waits. You can't outrun what's written into the fabric of existence. What you can do is face it with open eyes and a ready heart. Jung believed that much of neurosis stemmed from avoiding fundamental truths, and death is the deepest of them all. Our psyche knows mortality is real. When our ego refuses to engage with that fact, it creates distortions, anxiety, compulsions, even spiritual bypassing. That's why the death card, in its full symbolic force, is a medicine card. It invites the carent to name what must end, to stare at the skeleton and say, yes, I see you, and I'm ready to release. Try this. Instead of dodging death, engage it. Read books like Staring at the Sun by Irvin Yalom or Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. Write your own eulogy, not to be morbid, but to clarify what truly matters. What legacy do you want to leave? What illusions do you need to drop today to live more honestly tomorrow? When you name death, you shrink its shadow. When you deny it, you feed it with your fear. And yet, even as we resist death's presence, something in us knows it's essential. There's a pull toward the edge, a whisper from the bones, a deep ache for ritual. So if we've lost the art of dying well, what remains of the ancient wisdom that once guided us through these sacred thresholds? Integration of death into the hero's journey. In every great myth, there comes a moment when the hero must die, not always in body, but in spirit, identity, or illusion. This is the symbolic death at the heart of every transformation. The tarot traces this journey perfectly, from the suspended surrender of the hanged man to the dismemberment of death. It's not a detour, it's the path. You can't skip the underworld and still expect to return with wisdom. You have to lose something. Often, that something is who you thought you were. Death in the hero's journey is the dark night of the soul. It's the job loss that makes you question your worth, the betrayal that shatters your trust, the illness that strips away your invincibility. But in every one of these moments, there's a hidden initiation. The old self, the one built on ego, external validation, or inherited scripts, has to fall. Jung would call this the confrontation with the shadow, the integration of unconscious material. The psyche demands wholeness, and wholeness requires loss. Think of Luke Skywalker entering the cave on Dagobah. He meets Darth Vader, strikes him down, and finds his own face behind the mask. That's no coincidence. It's mythic architecture. Every real journey involves seeing the death within, facing the darker mirror, and letting go of illusions. The death card is this moment frozen in symbolic form. It doesn't promise safety, it offers rebirth. But only if the traveler is willing to descend fully into the unknown. A good exercise. Trace your own hero's journey. When did you face symbolic deaths? What roles or identities fell away? Map it out like chapters. Then ask yourself, what did I gain on the other side? Often the gift is invisible at first. Clarity, humility, resilience, self-trust. This isn't about turning pain into a motivational quote. It's about recognizing that without those ego deaths, your real story wouldn't have begun. You wouldn't have cracked open. But who stands at the threshold of this underworld? Who guides the soul through shadow, ambiguity, and unknowing? And why is it that in so many stories, the guide takes a feminine form, strange, satirical, even grotesque? Perhaps the answer lies in the anima, in the figures that bridge the unconscious and the self, in the mystery we call the shadow. The role of the feminine and the shadow. Death doesn't always come cloaked in darkness. It often wears lipstick, grins with a gold tooth, and laughs in your face. Think of La Catrina, the skeletal lady of Mexican Dia de los Muertos, or Posadas Calaveras, those satirical skeletons dressed like bourgeois women, mocking the living and reminding us, death is part of the dance. These feminine depictions of death are not just cultural quirks, they are archetypal expressions of the anima, the unconscious feminine force that guides us inward, downward, and into transformation. Carl Jung saw the anima as the bridge between the conscious ego and the unconscious depths. When she appears in dreams, myths, or tarot, she often arrives cloaked in mystery, duality, even seduction. Feminine representations of death, grotesque, beautiful, maternal, terrifying, carry this paradox. They birth and bury. They nurture and devour. The Great Mother in her dark aspect doesn't just comfort, she initiates. She tears illusions to pieces so something real can take their place. That's the shadow work most people avoid. These feminine death figures live at the threshold where meaning dissolves. They might show up in dreams as witches, sirens, skeletal queens. In art, they tease and taunt, holding mirrors to our vanity. In tarot, they whisper through the death card, "Sweetheart, you're not scared of me. You're scared of losing control." That's their secret power. They disarm through contradiction. And when we resist, they become nightmares. When we listen, they become guides. Want to get in touch with this archetype? Explore myths like Persephone's descent into the underworld or read Clarissa Pinkola Estate's Women Who Run with the Wolves. Reflect on your projections. Who do you demonize or idealize irrationally? Often, the feminine shadow lives in these figures. By seeing her clearly, especially in her death-dealing form, you reclaim parts of your soul. She doesn't want obedience. She wants wholeness. She'll wreck your comfort zone to get it. But what do poets say when logic fails and symbols go silent? What language do we have when only the heart knows what death means? Maybe that's why the greatest truths about mortality, transformation, and the sacred are whispered not in doctrines, but in poetry. Poetic and literary reflections on death. When reason falters and symbols become too sharp, poetry steps in. Death, after all, isn't just a fact. It's a feeling, a whisper in the bones, a presence that hovers just beyond language. Poets have always known this. W.B. Yeats wrote of death as both a terror and a liberation. Eliot framed it as silence between heartbeats, and Hopkins wrestled with the divine agony of decay and resurrection. These aren't just pretty words, they're attempts to name what defies naming. They turn the ineffable into echo. Shakespeare, too, gave death 1,000 faces. From Hamlet's skull to Romeo's poison, death in his works is never just about endings, it's a mirror. It reflects vanity, ambition, love, and fear. In King Lear, the storm rages as the king realizes he is not a god, but mortal flesh. And in that realization, he's more human than ever. That's the literary alchemy of death. It burns away pretense and leaves raw truth. The kind of truth the tarot death card holds up without apology. Carl Jung believed that literature gave form to the archetypes living inside us. So when we read Yeats asking, what portion in the world can the artist have but his own loneliness? We're not reading biography. We're seeing into the soul's cry during transformation. Poets, like tarot readers, aren't forecasting events. They're channeling symbols. They're interpreting the psyche. And death is one of its oldest, most insistent themes. It's not a full stop, it's a doorway, creaking open on metaphysical hinges. Feeling stuck in your own symbolic winter? Turn to poetry. Read Rilke's Duino elegies or Mary Oliver's When Death Comes. Let their words work like salves and scalpels. Write your own verses if you dare, on loss, change, or the parts of yourself you're ready to bury. Not everything needs to be understood rationally. Some truths need to be sung, groaned, or scribbled in the dark. That's the power of poetic reflection. It opens space inside you for what prose cannot hold. But as the poets sing and the mystics chant, modern society seems to hum a different tune. Sterile rooms, clinical language, professional detachment, has our cultural obsession with progress silenced death's sacred voice? Have we traded bone-deep wisdom for convenience, losing touch with the rituals that once made death human? Modern detachment and medicalization of death. Somewhere along the path of progress, death was handed over to professionals in white coats. It left the home, the hearth, the community, and entered the sanitized corridors of hospitals and clinics. Don't get it wrong, medicine saves lives. But when death becomes a failure instead of a transition, something essential is lost. We no longer sit with the dying, we observe them through machines. We no longer prepare for death, we fight it like a malfunction. In the process, we've amputated ritual from reality. This detachment shows in how we speak. We don't say someone died, we say they didn't make it. We measure their time left in numbers, not stories. And while palliative care and hospice movements are trying to bring back a more human approach, much of modern culture still treats death as a technical glitch. Families often don't know what to do. Grief becomes awkward. Mourning becomes rushed. The sacred space once held around death collapses under fluorescent lighting and polite denial. But something is shifting. Death doulas are re-emerging. Community rituals are returning. Books like Being Mortal by Atul Gawande or The Art of Dying Well by Katie Butler are gaining traction. More people are asking, how do we die meaningfully, not just medically? How do we reclaim the psychic and spiritual dimensions of death? Even death cafes, where strangers gather to talk openly about mortality, have popped up across the globe. It's not morbid. It's medicine for the soul. If you've never faced death closely, start small. Visit a grave. Read a memoir about dying. Listen to someone's end-of-life story without trying to fix or spiritualize it. Let the silence between your words do the heavy lifting. There's a sacred texture to death that no drug can mimic, no screen can capture. And when we lean in, not out, we remember that the end of life is still life, full of beauty, mystery, and profound transformation. But why is this return happening now? Why are science and spirituality, long at odds, suddenly converging around mortality's edge? Could it be that death, in all its silence and mystery, is not just the end of consciousness, but the very thing that awakens it? Modern detachment and medicalization of death. Somewhere along the path of progress, death was handed over to professionals in white coats. It left the home, the hearth, the community, and entered the sanitized corridors of hospitals and clinics. Don't get it wrong, medicine saves lives. But when death becomes a failure instead of a transition, something essential is lost. We no longer sit with the dying, we observe them through machines. We no longer prepare for death, we fight it like a malfunction. In the process, we've amputated ritual from reality. This detachment shows in how we speak. We don't say someone died, we say they didn't make it. We measure their time left in numbers, not stories. And while palliative care and hospice movements are trying to bring back a more human approach, much of modern culture still treats death as a technical glitch. Families often don't know what to do. Grief becomes awkward. Mourning becomes rushed. The sacred space once held around death collapses under fluorescent lighting and polite denial. But something is shifting. Death doulas are re-emerging. Community rituals are returning. Books like Being Mortal by Atul Gawande or The Art of Dying Well by Katie Butler are gaining traction. More people are asking, how do we die meaningfully, not just medically? How do we reclaim the psychic and spiritual dimensions of death? Even death cafes, where strangers gather to talk openly about mortality, have popped up across the globe. It's not morbid. It's medicine for the soul. If you've never faced death closely, start small. Visit a grave. Read a memoir about dying. Listen to someone's end-of-life story without trying to fix or spiritualize it. Let the silence between your words do the heavy lifting. There's a sacred texture to death that no drug can mimic, no screen can capture. And when we lean in, not out, we remember that the end of life is still life, full of beauty, mystery, and profound transformation. But why is this return happening now? Why are science and spirituality, long at odds, suddenly converging around mortality's edge? Could it be that death, in all its silence and mystery, is not just the end of consciousness, but the very thing that awakens it? Science, religion, and the human response to death. Few things provoke the human psyche more than death, and in that provocation, something miraculous happens. We create meaning. Some turn to science, seeking mastery over biology, searching for cures, cloning organs, chasing immortality through technology. Others bow in awe, turning to religion for narratives of the soul, karma, or eternal return. But at the center of both responses lies the same tremor, the tremendum. That primal, awe-striking mystery that death evokes. Werner Herzog once said, "Civilization is like a thin layer of ice upon a deep ocean of chaos and darkness." And death, it cracks the ice. It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a polarity, control versus surrender. The scientist tries to outwit death. The mystic tries to embrace it. But both are orbiting the same star, mortality. Jung believed that death was not only a biological event, but a psychic necessity. It awakens us to individuation. It forces us to reckon with the self beyond ego. That's why every spiritual tradition, whether Eastern or Western, has death at its center. Not as punishment, as initiation. Even in quantum physics, whispers of the eternal arise. Consciousness is no longer easily dismissed as a side effect of brain chemistry. The observer effect, entanglement, the non-locality of awareness, they all hint at something deeper, something death can't quite erase. And yet, we cling, we hope, we fight, because to accept death is to admit we are not in control. And that's terrifying. But maybe that terror, the tremendum, is the exact doorway to meaning. Not fear, but reverence. Here's something to reflect on. What's your current framework for death? Is it avoidance, curiosity, peace? Whether you lean scientific or spiritual, examine your beliefs not to prove them, but to feel them. Meditate on the memento mori concept. Remember that you will die. Let that awareness inform your choices today. Would you argue less? Love deeper? Start that book, end that toxic cycle. This isn't gloom, it's guidance. Death, when faced, brings life into color. Still, even with all this insight, poetic, spiritual, scientific, there remains a question that haunts both sages and skeptics alike. If death is necessary, then what is it for? What purpose does it serve in the great architecture of psyche, soul, and society? Maybe the final gift of death isn't found in what it takes, but in what it gives rise to. The necessity of death for renewal. Here's the hard truth most people avoid. You can't truly be reborn unless something in you dies. That's not just metaphor, that's architecture. Nature shows this again and again. Trees drop their leaves to survive winter. Snakes shed their skin to keep growing. Even stars collapse to create new galaxies. The death card isn't just a warning, it's a promise. That the endings we fear are often the gateways to the lives we were meant to live. It's not about erasing who you were. It's about allowing that old self to step aside, so the deeper you can emerge. Carl Jung knew that psychological death was the price of individuation. He didn't mean drama or destruction. He meant surrender. The ego has to yield to something bigger, more mysterious, more alive. And that often feels like death because, in a way, it is. The person you thought you had to be, the achiever, the victim, the good child, the rebel, must fall away. That's the only way the self, with all its paradoxes and fullness, can take root. Death, then, becomes the gardener of the soul. But this isn't a one-time event. It's cyclical. It happens again and again, through breakups, relocations, loss, failure, awakenings. Every time life says, let go, you stand at that skeletal threshold. And when you say yes, when you allow yourself to grieve, to release, to rest, you open the door to spiritual rebirth. That's why the skeleton on the tarot card is always in motion. Because death doesn't stop the journey, it deepens it. It turns survival into meaning. Want to practice this? At the end of every season, literal or metaphorical, ask yourself, what needs to die in me right now? Maybe it's a belief, a role, an old story you keep telling. Then ritualize the release. Burn a letter, cut your hair, clean a space, say goodbye out loud. Make it real. Make it sacred. Because when you honor death as a teacher, not a tyrant, you begin to live with eyes wide open and a heart willing to be reshaped. So as we close the circle, one truth remains. Death doesn't take, it teaches. And if we have the courage to listen, to lean in, and to let go, we don't just survive it, we become more alive than ever. But before we step into that new life, let's revisit what summoned us here in the first place, how Jung, the tarot, and the archetypes conspired to place this card, this symbol, this moment in your hands.